Hello and welcome to Show and Tell with me, Stephen Leslie, the series where I show you some photos and then go on to bury you in a blizzard of potentially bogus details about them. This is episode 9, can you believe it? But before we carry on, I need to issue a sincere apology. So in the last episode on William Klein, I talked about him potentially winning a Rolleiflex in a poker game and then illustrated that story with this photograph. It has since been brought to my attention, but only by one person, mind, that wasn't William Klein at all. That was the other natively French photographer, Robert Doisneau. Now this is quite embarrassing for me, as while I may occasionally stretch the truth a little, I always try and do so knowingly. But on this occasion I was deceiving not only you, my audience, but I was also deceiving myself, which is irksome. I should try and explain how this mistake came about. It might come as a huge surprise, but given how slick these shows are, but I do them all myself. There's no cameraman, there's no soundman, there's no editor, there's no producer, there's no sort of school of interns just making everything tick behind the scenes. It's all me on my own in a massive panic. So when I wanted to find a photo of William Klein, I had lots of photos of him when he was old, but I needed a photo of him young and preferably with a Rolleiflex. So I googled William Klein self-portrait and there was the photo of Doisneau with a camera that I ended up using. I even followed that link to this place, the FTN blog, whatever that is, and there, bold as brass, is the troublesome photo of Doisneau, falsely labelled as Klein, so that's why I made the mistake. The problem is, of course, that this sort of thing is rife on the internet. As an experiment, I went and googled Robert Doisneau self-portrait, and as you can see, you get loads of that image I thought was Klein. But then you also get this one. But then, when you go to search that out, you discover that it's not Doisneau at all, and it's not even Klein. It's Richard Avedon. Actually, it's Richard Avedon and his great head of luxuriant hair taking a picture of Sophie Loren in 1960. So you see that doing the research for these films is rife with pitfalls and booby traps. And not only that, but I'm also, bizarrely, a beneficiary and a victim of it. A few films ago, I wanted to find a particular Jeff Mermelstein photo, and so I googled Jeff Mermelstein. And do you know what happens when you do that? I'll show you what happens. This happens. If you Google Jeff Mermelstein, you get loads of photos that are indeed by Jeff Mermelstein. But then, when you scroll down the page a bit, through loads of Jeff Mermelstein's very impressive back catalogue, you also eventually find this photo, which isn't by Jeff Mermelstein at all. It's by me. That's right. And so then you follow the link and go to the Exhibit Art website. And there it is, absolutely huge and wrongly attributed to Jeff Mermelstein, which is basically doing us both over. The internet is full of mistakes. It's shocking. Who'd have thought it? And obviously, the reason they've confused me for Mermelstein is that in my photo, a woman has a wallet in her mouth and a dachshund under her arm. And Jeff Mermelstein took a famous and fantastic photo of a man in New York City with a book in his mouth and another one of a woman with $1 in her mouth. See, side by side, they're all almost identical. Easy mistake to make, Exhibit Art. Anyway, moving on, because I really want to show you some other new photos and see if you can guess what this late December episode of Show and Tell is going to be. That's right, it's a seasonal Christmas special. Look, tinsel. Ho, ho, ho. So I really don't want this to turn into some mega long episode, although it probably will. But so what I've done is there's loads and loads of Christmas photos out there. So I've broken them down into a number of different categories. And then once I've gone through all those, I'm going to veer off in a random direction at the end, like some drunk uncle slipping on some ice, because that's the sort of thing I like to do. And because, as I mentioned earlier, I haven't got a producer or anyone else who's going to tell me not to. So with all that in mind, we better get going. So the first category of photographs is Santa. Now, there are several subcategories of Santa photos floating about, and my favourite is not street at all, but can best be described as the evil, possibly child molester Santa causing extreme distress for little kids category. All these photos are vintage anonymous shots which are guaranteed to give you a nightmare, and which I love because they go some way to eroding the kind of overly saccharine, conventional advertising version of Christmas, which we will examine in greater detail later on. This one here, in black and white, actually looks like something out of a horror movie. The poor kid looks resigned to his terrible fate in this bricked up dungeon. And just look at the way masked Santa is holding his little hand there. Chilling. And finally, there's this one, which is actually not vintage at all, but by Martin Parr, taken in the Harrods Grotto in 2002, and is a fantastic update on those older shots, and just goes to show that being sat on a strange bearded man's lap is not every kid's idea of a fun afternoon out, even if there is a present in it for them at the end. Taking shots of Santa is almost a photographic rite of passage in that so many of the greats have gone and done it. This group shot, I'm not sure what the collective noun for Santas is, let's call them a mob, is by Elliot Erwitt in 1955 in New York City, and it has to be said they all look quite menacing when you get a few gathered together. 9 years after this shot, in 1964, Diane Arbus went and did the photographs for a Saturday Evening Post article called This Ho 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 Business, and turned in these shots, which I'm sure the editor was delighted with, because they all look absolutely bloody terrifying. Even this one, of a presumably happily married Mr. and Mrs. Santa, looks as though they're about to murder you on the carpet there, and then use your drained blood to dye Santa's suit a deeper shade of red. Arbus wasn't the only New York-based photographer to seek out St. Nick, though. In 1968, a 21-year-old photography student called Bruce Gilden spent the day following a Santa around and took this shot at the end of his working shift. Gilden, being Gilden though, even when he was just 21, manages to make this into a brooding and menacing frame. But the truth of it was that this Santa was actually an alcoholic. Gilden had also photographed him drinking in his local bar and leaving it, presumably slightly worse for wear, earlier on. The reason for this is that Gilden's 1968 Santa was part of an annual Sidewalk Santa initiative run by the Volunteers of America that gave homeless and down-and-out men from the Bowery the chance to raise money and get themselves a few hot meals by dressing as Santa over the Christmas period. Now, this may sound either an extremely good or an extremely terrible idea, depending on how drunk your particular Santa turned out to be, but it also formed the basis for what is probably the most comprehensive Santa photography project that was done nearly a decade later by Magnum photographer Susan Mazailas, who spent 2 seasons with these homeless Bowery Santas and took some amazing photographs. Mazailas is a great, serious photographer, and she brings a real humanity to these unlikely Santas. I particularly like this one of a man getting into his costume, and you get the sense that it's a hard job being noticed for different reasons out on the streets. It's a really interesting project, and one worth seeking out. The Volunteers of America Santa Initiative ended quite recently after almost 100 years, which is a real shame, but the phenomenon of mobs of Santas just keeps on growing and is irresistible to photographers. Here's a photo I took in London in about 2001. This was actually taken in Easter, and these poor people had become trapped on the Circle line on the London Underground and had been going round in circles for almost 4 solid months by the point I took this photo. And some people claim they're still there to this very day. This is a great, strange one by Chris Steele Perkins of a Santa driving instructor that I know absolutely nothing else about other than it was taken in 1986. And this is a photo by Johan Windel in Sweden in 2018 that I wish I'd taken because it's both about Santa and being bald, a subject which, as you all know, is very close to my heart. There is also a subcategory of exotic Santas. Christmas is obviously a global event, and so Santa can often be found in warm environments, which makes for great, incongruous, slightly wrong-looking photographs. So this is by Don Hudson in 2015 in the Toledo Zoo Aquarium, and this is by Yuri Matish in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil in 2018. And finally this one is by Tony Martin in a Darwin shopping mall. And the fact that that last shot was from Australia leads me only slightly clunkily into my next category, which is Christmas trees. And for this, I want to look at the work of one photographer in particular and one of his books in particular, and that photographer is Trent Park. Now, Park is a fantastic photographer who has done lots of amazing work, both in Australia and across the world. But I honestly think that his 2013 book, The Christmas Tree Bucket, Trent Park's Family Album, is one of the best, or certainly my favourite thing of everything that he's done. And that's because it manages to capture an aspect of Christmas that everyone knows about, but which is rarely portrayed in photos. And that's the utter exhaustion, mania, and anarchy of being a parent at Christmas with young children. So Park took the photos in 2006 when he and his wife and two very young kids had moved from Sydney to Adelaide and were actually staying with his in-laws in the suburbs while they looked for a place of their own. So it's a full-on family Christmas in Australia with kids getting boisterous, overexcited and tetchy. And the book itself is a really lovely tactile object. It's been designed so that it's bound in this kind of fake leather, like an old photo album. And when you open it up, you can see that it's got what looks like Christmas wrapping paper on the inside. But it's the photos inside that are the real treat and the real presents. There are so many great shots, and I haven't really got time to just show them all. So I'll whiz through some. And there's a real air of menace about a lot of them. And Santa himself comes off really, really badly. The kids string him up, use him as a piñata, and then parade around with his decapitated head before turning on each other. Almost Lord of the Flies stuff. Although here it isn't a fly, but actually some giant Australian bug. But it isn't just the kids. Park also records the inane things that adults get up to when they're forced to spend a lot of time in close proximity to their relatives. So there's strange party drinking games, impressive festive bruises from paintballing. The red underwear there is a really nice Santa-like detail. And then the resultant hangovers, questionable swimwear. I think this might actually be Trent Park himself, although I'm not certain. I assume this is his father-in-law, dressed as a hot dog, whilst incinerating the meat. Even the gingerbread house gets set on fire. But the book is called The Christmas Tree Bucket, and there's a great story behind why that is. So the Christmas tree gets placed in a red bucket, but in the run-up to Christmas, Park got really ill with a mystery ailment. He'd been out shopping and getting a haircut, and when he got home he started being violently sick and proceeded to vomit ferociously for an astonishing 15 hours. And the first nearest thing he grabbed to be sick into was the Christmas tree bucket. So this photograph, and I presume the other one of him in his mankini thing, if that was actually him, were both taken by his wife, Narelle, who is also a great photographer. So now, whenever you look at these photographs again and spot the bucket in the background, you always think of Trent Park puking, which I find very funny indeed. And after that Christmas, they went away for a couple of months, but their son wouldn't let them take the Christmas tree down before they went. And so when they got back, they returned to find this, which is just the perfect Christmas tree photo, still in its bucket, which presumably they had cleaned the sick out of. So that's a great, very different kind of Christmas photography project, and they're difficult to find because, you know, the field is so dominated by Santas and people dressing up and nice things that it's difficult to find something genuinely interesting and different. Now, there is another one that I've discovered, and it's by the great, legendary even, Irish street photographer Tony O'Shea. Now, interestingly, when you go and Google Tony O'Shea's name, you find a lot of photographs of this man, who is neither Tony O'Shea the photographer nor Robert Doisneau, but apparently a famous darts player, also called Tony O'Shea, who is known as the Silverback. But great darts player though the Silverback Tony O'Shea might be, I don't think he's ever done anything as great as the photographer Tony O'Shea's Christmas project, which really is a doozy. So between the years of 1990 and 1993, O'Shea went out and photographed the Christmas market on Mary's Lane in Dublin. So you might be thinking, well, that's all well and good, but it's just a few photos of some Christmas trees. That's hardly anything exceptional. And that's because I'm teasing you a little bit and not really giving you the full story, but also because I feel I should issue a bit of a warning or an apology to any vegetarians who might be watching, or if anyone's of a nervous disposition, maybe now is the point at which you want to fast forward through a bit or skip, because the Christmas market in Mary's Lane in Dublin didn't just sell Christmas trees. It also sold turkeys. You can see one hanging from the boot of this car here as that woman presumably removes a stray feather from its arse, while this woman here has got herself a brace of absolutely huge birds. The sight of so many dead turkeys just left out in the open like this is a truly weird and unsettling thing. Those dogs in the background are behaving themselves far better than my dog ever would, I can tell you that. Initially, it might seem the most un-Christmassy event imaginable, except that then you realise it only occurred because of Christmas. Tony O'Shea's photographs reveal the cold, plucked truth behind every Christmas feast. That's why I think they're utterly brilliant. The bizarreness of what we're looking at aside, they're also incredibly honest. If you want this, then you have to go via this. But that's what we all usually choose to ignore. The story goes that O'Shea photographed the market for 3 years between 1990 and 1993. I have no idea how long it had been going on prior to that, but then when he went back to photograph it again in 1994, it had gone, vanished, presumably because health and safety had finally said, enough, you can't do that out in the open anymore, and that was the end of the Christmas turkey market in Dublin. But that in itself has a link to an aspect of Christmas photography that I want to try and discuss next, and that's the fleeting nature of the event, because that is tied into photography as well. Photography is an attempt to capture the ephemeral, isn't it? And that's what Christmas is. Christmas is a fleeting, ephemeral, annual thing. So I think that there's an interesting link going on between photography and Christmas itself. And that's what I'm going to try and discuss and unpick in the next category, which is photographs of snow. Now, snow is associated with Christmas, but we don't always get a white Christmas, do we? Snow comes and goes when it pleases. It was snowy here in London last week, but it's not anymore, and I doubt we'll get a snowy Christmas day this year, much to my son's disappointment. But photographs of snow, these are some I've taken over the last few years, are always fun to look at because they are transformative. Snow makes the familiar seem strange and exotic, and that's a vital part of what street photographers are trying to do every day. Snow or no snow, we're out there trying to find different ways of looking at stuff to make the familiar seem exotic and strange. And so when it does snow, that's a great bonus. This is a photo I took a few years ago, not at Christmas, actually during the Jewish Festival of Purim, but it's a strange image anyway, and the addition of snow just lifts it a notch and makes it truly perplexing. Obviously, there's an entire avalanche of snow photos out there for you to take a look at, and what I'll try and do is bung some up on the community pages over the Christmas period for you all to have a look at. But what I do want to do is have a quick look at some snow photos by another one of my favourite photographers that I've talked about quite a bit before, and that's Andre Cortez. As I explained a while back in the dog film, I think it was, Cortez loved taking photographs from up on high, on balconies, and he did this throughout his long career. So here's one he took of a snow-covered park in Paris in the early 1930s. But then when Cortez and his wife moved from France to New York City just before the Second World War, they moved to a 13th floor apartment just off Fifth Avenue that overlooked Washington Square. And Cortez would spend hours out on the balcony with his telephoto lens taking photos, particularly in the winter when it snowed, until his fingers turned numb. And his wife had to call him in and tell him to come in and have a cup of hot soup. And some of the photographs he took those snowy photographs, are absolutely magical. This is probably the most famous one, but there are loads more. And the thing that I love is that he didn't just take photos of the park, he also took these much quieter shots, presumably from another window, which are of MacDougall Alley, which you can see with my no expense or talent spared graphic here, is located just to the north of the park. And these are just gorgeous. I think that when you look at these photos, you can hear the muffled silence that thick snow imposes on everything. I sometimes wonder if Cortez would have made friends with other people in his building just so he could get slightly different angles from out of their windows too. That would be hilarious, wouldn't it? Your doorbell goes and it's Andre from the 13th floor with his camera, wanting to know if he might just come in and go into your bathroom so he can stand on top of the toilet and lean out of the bathroom window so he can get a different angle on the park below. Who knows? Cortez also took this noisier snow photo of kids playing in Washington Square in 1969. that taps into the great tradition of children playing in the snow photos. There's this one that predates it by William Witt from 1940, and then there are these other more recent colourful echoes. So in chronological order, we have Stefan Kovac, Brad Jones in America, Matt Stewart in the Netherlands, and finally Alexander Gronsky in Russia. Now all of these photographs are beautifully composed, but I think there's also something else at play here, and that's a kind of timeless, universal quality that's conferred by the presence of snow. So the clothes and the locations might change, but the spirit is always the same. Snow lends a dusting of nostalgia to whatever it covers, and that nostalgia, that feeling, is deep-seated within us. It seems to even predate photography. It goes back as far as painting, and when we start talking about that and snow painting, one painting in particular always seems to come up, and it's by Peter Bruegel the Elder, and it's called Hunters in the Snow from 1565. Although the scenes of play here are actually taking place far further out onto the ice, this amazing painting seems to combine both Cortez's high-up perspectives and another foreground scene. And this playing with frame, this squashing together of two different images, gives the eye just so much, almost too much to look at. And while we're on the subject of nostalgia, it's worth bearing in mind and understanding that there are actually two distinct categories of nostalgia. There's the more common nostalgia, which is a yearning for something that you can actually remember, something that you might miss. So that photo of Brad Jones's of children playing in the snow might make you remember when you were a child and you played in the snow, and now you miss that. You feel nostalgic for that. But there's another category of nostalgia, and that's called, and I hope I get the pronunciation of this right, anemoia. And anemoia is a feeling of nostalgia and a yearning for a time that existed before you were alive. So something that you could not have personally experienced, but you still feel a yearning or a loss of. And I find this fascinating because obviously the main source for anemoia is photographs and films. We can see the past and we can experience something that we could never have directly lived or directly experienced. And there's one photographer, I think, whose photographs are anemoic, if that is a word, to the extreme, and that photographer is Saul Leiter. Now, one day I will do a whole show on Saul Leiter when I can figure out something to say that hasn't already been said. But, and I think he's absolutely fantastic, by the way. But I want to just have a quick look at three of his photos here and sort of try and figure out why they provoke such a strong feeling of anemoia, because I think a lot of it has to do with snow, and they're three snowy photos. There's this one from his new Undiscovered Shots book. There seems to be another one of those out each week. And this is in 1960, and it's just a glimpse out of a taxi window driving through Harlem. And then there's this one of a woman in a red umbrella walking past a car in a blizzard. And finally this really quite famous one of two postmen in a snowstorm in 1952. Now, why do all these photographs work so well? Why do they make us, or at least me, hanker for a time before I was born? It's not just the snow. The snow is a lovely extra visual element, but it still snows today, and just being out in the snow doesn't make me yearn to be born in the 1930s or 1940s, does it? It might be the colour palette. Leiter was shooting on slide film that I don't think you can get today, so his colours are practically unique. But weirdly, what I've come to understand is that it's not the snow at all, it's actually the advertising and design in the background. That's what's doing it. That's what's provoking the anemoia or the nostalgia. The stuff going on in the background of these shots is all classic design and typography, evocative of a certain era. And even though it's commercial and dated, it's also incredibly powerful and transporting. Just look how many Coke and Pepsi and 7-Up adverts there are in this one. When you combine that with snow and the suggestion of Christmas, then it's almost irresistible. I think it's significant that Leiter was almost overlooked during his own lifetime, and he had to wait until the world had changed so much around him that his photographs took on a new power, and it was a power that was bolstered and enhanced by the viewer's feeling of nostalgia and anemoia while looking at them. So the last photo I want to consider today is by me, and it's this one. So I took this in 2018, and as you can see, it's of the HMV Megastore in Oxford Street in London during a blizzard. I had gone into town that day for a meeting, and it hadn't even been snowing when I left my house, but by the time I got off the underground and came up the steps, this is what I saw. In fact, I can even show it to you in motion because I filmed it on my phone. Here, look at this. So that footage was taken immediately after I'd taken the photo of the bloke in the hat waiting to cross the road. I had my camera in one hand and the phone in the other, and I was really lucky that he paused for the traffic in just the right spot. And I'm including this image, and I'm going to talk about it at some length, simply because, not just because it's snowy, but because there's actually quite a bit more going on here than you might initially appreciate. So I'm going to try and explain that. The famous little fox terrier there on the shop sign with his head cocked towards the trumpet was called Nipper, and he was originally owned by a man named Mark Broad in the 1800s. When Mark Broad died in near poverty in 1887, Nipper was taken in by Mark's brother, the artist Francis Broad, who noticed that the loyal dog would often sit listening to a wax cylinder recording of his late brother's voice. Francis was a commercial artist and took out a copyright on the painting in 1898, which was then just called Dog Looking at and Listening to a Phonograph. Francis wasn't a very successful artist though, and he tried selling the painting to the Edison Company, but got knocked back with the logic that dogs don't listen to phonographs, which, as we all know, is nonsense. He was also rejected by the Royal Academy and numerous magazines, but finally got a break when the painting was seen by a Mr. Barry Owen, representative of the Gramophone Company in 1899. He asked Francis if he could alter the painting so that it depicted Nipper listening to a record player instead of a wax cylinder. Francis readily agreed. He needed the money after all, and sold the new image to the Gramophone Company for the princely sum of £50 plus a further £50 for the copyright. This was the origin of what would become one of the most well-known trademarks in the world. Over the next 25 years, the painting, now simply known as His Master's Voice, gradually came to represent the entire company, eclipsing and finally replacing the Gramophone Company. They opened their first shop on Oxford Street in 1921, but then moved to a bigger premises further up near Bond Street in the 1930s. And by 1986, it was, for a while at least, the biggest record shop in the world. So the painting of Nipper is of a dog listening to his dead master's voice. Now that is dog nostalgia right there. That's a dog yearning for something that it can no longer have, but something that it can remember. Now, I find this absolutely fascinating, especially when we start to look at the evolution of that sign and that particular shop sign. So here is the earliest photo I can find of the main Oxford Street store, which is from 1937. It's taken at night, and you can see that it's different to the sign I photographed. It's all neon, and the dog is over here on the left-hand side. However, this shop was almost completely destroyed by fire later on in 1937, as you can see from these amazing shots, both of the inside and the outside, together with all the gawping crowds and firemen. And I mean, they're just truly fantastic photographs. And just imagine the smell of all that melted vinyl. It must have stunk for months afterwards. Anyway, once the shop had been gutted and cleared out, there was a temporary front put up, and then by 1939 this new front had gone up, which looks like the sign I photographed in 2018. But that's not the case, because at some point, and I'm not exactly sure when, but at some point in the late 1950s or 1960s, it was changed again to look like this, which, as you can see, is a totally different design again. And it still looked like that up until 1976. And then in the 1980s, it changed twice, I think to this, and then to this, until finally, in about 2013 or so, the entire shop was reopened with a new old sign. So the shop sign that I photographed in 2018 during a blizzard was in fact nostalgia made real. It was an anemoia-inducing piece of calculated advertising to hark back to and invoke the shop from the 1930s. It was a simulation, or a replica, or even a tribute band. My photo is further helped by the corner of the black London taxi vanishing off to the left here, and by this man's bowler hat. Now, why is he wearing a bowler hat in 2018, you might wonder? Well, because he's employed by Oxford Street as some kind of meter and greeter to welcome tourists and point them in the right direction when they want to go and buy some hideously overpriced tat. I say he's employed by Oxford Street. That's no longer true because I think he lost his job during COVID and I've no longer seen him there since. So this whole photograph, while it's a true representation of what I saw that day, isn't exactly what it might first seem, but it's improved, it's supercharged by the presence of snow, which helps transform and sharpen the nostalgia. And by the way, it was never a Christmas photo to begin with. I took this in February of 2018, but you wouldn't know that unless I told you. It could always stand in for a Christmas photo because of the snow. And there's one last thing about this image which is worth considering, and that's about the transient nature of snow. Snow in the UK, at least, is rare and fleeting. It comes, brings everything to a standstill, gets kids all excited, and then goes. And like I said before, photography is an effort to preserve because each fleeting moment, like a snowflake, is unique. It's never going to be repeated. I take photos because I want to try and freeze something while it's still there, because it might not be there when I go back. Just like the snow, and that's exactly the case with this shop, because that shop, the HMV flagship shop, which had been in Oxford Street for nearly 100 years, no longer exists. When I went back to take another photo of it in 2020, this is what I found. Ugly, isn't it? HMV went into receivership and it was taken over by this. I mean, it looks absolutely hideous. No wonder people get nostalgic for what's gone. No wonder people have anemoia for a time before they were born when the time that they are living in looks like this. All that's left is a blue plaque commemorating the past. And actually the bloke who works there now selling disgusting overpriced American candy to tourists told me that the original sign, which remember was never actually the original sign, but a 10 or so year old simulation or a replica designed to remind people or give them anemoia for a sign that they'd never actually seen, was now, they'd never actually taken it away, they'd just covered it over like it was in a coffin. So it's still up there on the building, but just you can't see it anymore, which is both sad but fitting, because there's a myth, and it might just be a myth, which says that this object here that Nipper was sitting on was the coffin of his dead owner Mark Barord. And that's when he was listening to his dead, his master's voice. And so now Nipper's been put in a plastic casket of his own too, sealed up behind the Statue of Liberty, holding a Wonka bar and a lollipop. And on that cheery, festive note, I'm going to leave you. Thanks so much to everyone who's been watching over the last few months. It's been a very enjoyable journey. I hate that word, but it has been a very enjoyable few months. I've had a lot of very, very encouraging responses, and I'm going to try and make some more great films in 2023. Please, leave some comments, subscribe, etc., etc., etc. Also, just before the new year, I'm going to give you all a present from my big groaning sack, which is, I'm going to give you a film which is not a film to do with photography at all. It's a film I made quite a few years ago, but it's very funny. It's with a script and with proper actors, great actors actually. And yeah, it was funded by the BFI. It's a proper thing. And I'm going to drop it on here just before New Year's if I can find it in a drawer somewhere. But yeah, so thank you very, very much. I have to take this off now because it's actually stopping the circulation to my head. And yeah, that's it. Thank you all for watching. Happy Christmas. Happy New Year. Bye.